Okay, so we're gonna have a short lecture about firefly photography and flash patterns. So why take pictures is usually a big question. Pictures will help you during your collecting, will help you to document the species, the specimen you collected or you just caught for the photograph purpose. Again, be aware that please know if you can collect specimens or if you can catch specimens and release, if that's a possibility. Make sure you know what's going on wherever you are. And in most cases, like in this one on the picture, this one is Lucidota luticalis. It will help you to identify the specimen, most likely to genus, very rarely not. If you have a nice dorsal picture from above and from below. And for sure, usually to genus in the US and Canada, but sometimes even to species, like in this one. This one shows you all the characters you would need to know to see that it's this species. You can see the serrated antennae here on the left. You can see the orange one-colored pronotum or head shield. And you can see this last abdominal segment, the pygidium, that's yellow. So you know, you can for sure say with this picture what species this would be in the US. Again, we now talk about regulations. Contact the authorities wherever you go way ahead of time. Give them time to communicate with you, and make sure that, you know, if you need to get a permit or something like that, like a catch and release permit, a collect permit or so, these things take, you know, time with bureaucracy. So please contact them early. And then, you know, when you can you catch and release fireflies, catch them, take a few pictures, then release them again, or can you catch and collect, you know, take some specimens home for better pictures at home, better depositing the specimens in a natural history museum, or in the, you know, state park, state forest, like ranger station or so. Sometimes some of these have their own collections that they keep to be able to show what kind of species of any kind of insect or other things they have in their park or a forest. And then, yeah, when you know that, you know, go out and be safe, but, you know what you can do. And important things are what makes a good image, right? So you want to go as close as you can possibly do with whatever you want to use. Like you have your iPhone camera or your iPhone, your Android. The cameras in a lot of phones are very amazing now. They have macro functions, some of them. Some have focus. Do not use your digital focus too much, because the more you use of the digital focus, the grainier your pictures can get. So get as close as you can with a reasonable, like I usually don't shoot more than 4x with my camera. I don't have a macro function on my phone. Usually 4x is the max to get a decent picture, but fill the frame with the firefly. And then take a pic, make sure it's in focus. If you have a nice camera like a DSLR or click and shoot, those have some nice macro functions as well. Again, put the whole firefly in frame and then focus as good as you can. A lot of times depth of focus, depth of field is not possible to get like everything. Like on this one, you can see the body, the elytra and the head shield, and most of the antennae are very well in focus, but some of the legs are a little bit out of focus just because of the field of depth. And you know, if you have a nice camera like a DSLR or something, you might be able to stack your pictures. You know, there's some with have automatic stacking sensor that can take like 20 pictures in different intervals. And then make sure that you can see the key body parts that you want to see in a dorsal picture like this one from above. You want to be able to see the antennae, the head shield, and the elytra for sure. And the scutellum is also sometimes very important, the shape of it. So in this picture, this is a very good picture where you can see a lot of detail that you would want. And from this picture, you can tell it's kind of like elongated. The antennae are filiform or filiform, and then the shape of the head shield and the coloration, it's mostly obvious that this is a species in the genus Photinus. Also with the coloration of the elytra, with the lateral sides and the part where the elytra meet being colored like that. You also, as Richard said yesterday, you can assume this one has a light organ. This one is a picture I took for fast to send to a colleague. Not the greatest picture because, first of all, it's still wet from ethanol, so you get a lot of glare. I took it at too high of magnification, so it's kind of grainy, right? For the purpose I wanted it, it was good enough, but like it's out of focus. And I could have done a much better job if I wanted to put this like on iNaturalist or send it to, you know, a researcher to get an idea what it is. And this is the underside of a firefly. This is the other side that you want to take a picture of. So you can see, you know, how are the light organs set up? How many, you know, segments are the light organs on it? Is it a male or a female? The size of the eyes. You can see the legs. You can see, you know, all the parts of the legs, the coxa, the femur, the tibia, the tarsi. Sometimes the coloration of them. Coloration is never a great character to go by because it's very variable, but sometimes that works. And this is a firefly from Laos. And I just wanted to know what genus it is. And then my colleague was able to, even with the bad quality, was able to identify that for me. Those are pictures like this one. Like I took this with a DSLR, not with a cell phone. But you can see all the legs are mostly in focus. The antennae are. The flatter the firefly is, the easier it gets to put everything into focus. If like a Photurus or so, that's like has that hunched, appearance, it's harder because your field of depth gets bigger and bigger. So sometimes it's not possible with one shot to get everything. But this one shows, all the key characters that you would need to identify this. And so again, get as close as your camera can focus on your specimen. Use the macro settings if they're available. They have special algorithms to get better pictures. And if the firefly moves too much, put it into a scratch-free Petri dish, like some kind of plastic that's see-through, like a Petri dish, or a plastic sandwich bag where you can kind of like press down a little bit next to the firefly and immobilize it and put it in place, and then take a picture through the bag or the Petri dish. This will introduce a little bit of glare, but that is better than you trying to focus on something that's constantly moving, or worse, can fly away and you lose it. What views are important? So mostly if you want to use this to reliably identify this, you need a good picture of the pronotum. The shape of it, the coloration is sometimes important. The scutellum, also the shape and the coloration are sometimes important. They can be like shield-like or triangles-like. The elytra, the wing covers. Then you want a ventral or underside view, where you can see, as on the bottom here, you can see the light organs, how they're set up. all the legs, the eye size, the mouth parts are sometimes important. Like the mouth parts, you can distinguish between Photinus and Photurus. And if you can get a nice close-up of the eyes, the mouth parts, and the antennae, that's also can be very helpful for identification purposes, especially if you want to upload the pictures to a naturalist or email some kind of specialist or so, a colleague, to help you identify the firefly further than genus. These pictures might be able to help. A lot of times you will need the genitalia extracted, so you might not be able to get a species ID with a picture no matter what, but it will definitely help to kind of like exclude some species or some genera from what you have. So here again, pronotum, scutellum, the elytra, the underside view, and here, if you can get a picture of that view, the eyes, mouth parts, and the antennae, showing if the antennae, what shape they have. Are they serrate or filiform or flabellate? And sometimes, like in Pyropygia, they are like very slightly serrate, so a nice close-up of that is very helpful. This one is a very nice picture by Tom Murray, a close-up of a female Photinus consimilis. And it shows the details of the pronotum. It shows the scutellum right here. And it's black here, right here. It shows the antennae, and you can see it's filiform. And it also shows the elytra. So this is a very good dorsal shot that's very helpful. You can see the eyes are, they're like more like medium. They're not very small. They're also not very big. So some tips and tricks. This is a picture by Richard, and using a piece of graph paper where you know the size of the square grid, like in this case 5 millimeters, allows you to measure the size of the firefly without harming it. You take a picture like this, and it's great. This is also a very nice picture showing the main parts of the firefly. The legs are a little bit out of focus because of the hunched position, but you can see very nice the maculation on the head shield. You can see the elytra very well. There's a little bit of glare from a petri dish, I believe, but it's very still a very nice picture. And tips and tricks. If anything, make sure you get a nice picture of the dorsal from top and the ventral side on the underside. If it's not possible for you to get some of the other pictures, make sure that your focus is on the firefly, and with a petri dish sometimes, or like the paper underneath, sometimes your camera tries to focus like on these lines or on the top of the petri dish instead of on the actual object that you want to photograph. So try to get that done. Use a piece of paper or your hand as a background. You can do that. You don't have to do that. It helps you sometimes focus, but it also can just distract from the image. So maybe not. Graph paper or ruler you can put a ruler next to the fire underneath the petri dish or the plastic bag to show the size. If you don't have any graph paper. And then, yeah, the plastic bag or petri dish. But make sure you don't have too many scratches and stuff in there, because that's going to produce glare and your image might not come out very nice, and you might not be able to focus very well if you do that. So switch out your petri dish after some uses if you start seeing scratches and things during that. Sergio said something about the impression that only some Elychnia were placed under Photinus, not all, but yes, I can upload both of those papers, but they were definitely all placed into into Photinus. So there's no genus Elychnia anymore. Here, here's a few pictures that Richard took, and they are all on the website for the Firefly Atlas, and they're all there with like little descriptions to show you guys on how to do this and how to take nice pictures. On the bottom left, on the top left, you see this is taken by a cell phone, and it shows the dorsal view, and you can see the size of the firefly, but it's a little bit far away. It's not, it could be closer, but that might be, the camera might not have allowed getting much closer without losing focus or being able to focus nicely. On the top right, you have a Photurus firefly in a plastic bag, and you kind of like can use your fingers on both sides of the firefly to press down a little bit so it's not moving anymore, but don't press too hard. You don't want to squish it. And again, you have a ruler in the background so you can see the size of the firefly. And usually we measure size from the end of the abdomen to the top of the head. We do not include the antennae in the size. On the bottom left, there's a petri dish, and here the firefly sits on the top of the petri dish, but you have a great view of the underside, the ventral side of the firefly. Here you have to navigate your camera a little bit to the side so your glare is not underneath or on the firefly, it's sideways. So here you can see the glare still, but you can see the firefly, all the details very nicely that you would need to see on this one. And here you can actually see this is Micronaspis, and we talked about yesterday how like the pronotum is kind of see-through. You can still see that here, kind of how that is still a little bit see-through, and so you can see a lot of detail on this picture. It's a very nice picture for identification without harming the firefly. On the bottom right, you have one, and the underside, as said here, is important to determining the sex of the firefly. I think I'm going to talk about that in the advanced morphology, how you can sex a firefly by looking at the underside. So you know if it's a male or female. Most of the time, the shape or so of the light organ will help you, but sometimes that doesn't work with like day flyers that don't have a light organ. You can still sex them based on the shape of the last segments of the firefly. So, but we'll talk about that in the, the last lecture of the day. Habitat pictures are also very nice and important. So if you are planning to go out at night, if you go out during the day, like we said that you should go out during the day to get familiar with your surroundings, take a few pictures of the habitat. What kind of plants can you see, right? The picture shows us the vegetation structure, the species of the vegetation. It shows you the terrain, that you have, like water in the background, like there's water, there's houses, so there's probably some light pollution. It's rocky shores of the lake, a little pond or lake. All this information is very informative, and it will help us to come up with a life history and ecology of the firefly species that we're looking at. And this picture is from New Mexico of a Photinus, and it's the habitat of Photinus firefly. So it's these pictures are very informative, and you should always try to get some of the habitat of these species. Next, long exposures. I'm sure all of you are familiar with all these really cool long exposures where you see seemingly thousands and thousands of fireflies blinking or flashing. Usually that's not just one long exposure. It's usually a number of long exposures overlaid. Those are more for like the artistic I think it's more like an artistic thing than actually helpful for identification. If you want to do an identification one, you want to do a one shot of a probably like anything between 8 to 10 or so seconds, a second exposure. Like you can see here on the left, you have a 10-second exposure, and you can see very nicely the flash train pattern of a Photinus carolina, of a few Photinus carolinus specimens that are flashing there. Also, like just one picture, they're still beautiful because you have like all these flashes and you can see how the firefly moves. It captures very important information, your flash color, the number of flashes that a firefly does, the flight height. Like in this one, hopefully you have a picture of the background when it's still light, so you kind of know, the habitat, but also you can measure how high these fireflies are flying. And then the shape of the flashes, like are they in a straight line? Do they do some kind of like shape during their flashing? So these are all things that you can capture with this. What's important when you want to look at these and evaluate your pictures, you want to make sure that you know later your exposure length, so how many seconds, your f-stop of your camera. Usually, I think some iPhones have this now where you can do long exposures, but usually you do like use like a DSLR camera with a very wide, like low f-stop. Like my camera does an f1.8, so it gathers as much light as possible. And these are like the lenses you use for star photography or astrophotography as well. So you're doing the long exposure, the camera in this really dark habitat you are in, like, at night, there's hopefully no moon, it's very dark. So the camera can gather as much light and can capture these flashes. And then you want to also record your ISO. And those are like all numbers that are important later to figure out what's going on out and the way you can identify maybe one of the species on the picture. And then in a lot of ways, and a lot of times, record the air temperature, because that's also going to help you figuring out what species you have by knowing was the flash slower or faster because of the higher temperatures. And if you're looking at Futurist, Jim has in his book the flash pattern based on temperature, like on a gradient. You can see how the flash pattern changes, or the speed of the flash pattern changes throughout lower and higher temperatures. And he has that for almost every species in his book. This is a picture I took a couple of years or 3 years or so ago in Tennessee. This is a Futurist species. This was on a photography workshop I participated in with Alex Wild and a couple other people that are amazing photographers. And this is probably like 30 exposures overlaid of this Futurist species blinking. This was just like this little, very slowly sloping hill where thousands and thousands of these Futurist species, I think it was Futurist tremulans, thousands of them were out flashing. This was just maybe a kilometer away where we parked to see the synchronous Photinus carolinus fireflies. So it was an amazing trip, and I learned a lot about photography with those guys. Well, looking at this, I found that you can find some apps for your phones. For iPhone, you have Nightcap Camera. That is an app for low light photography and videos that kind of like makes your settings for these. And the picture on the right here was taken with this app, apparently. And you can see very nicely the flash patterns of some of these fireflies. So this app might work. Try it out if you have an iPhone. For Android, the app does not exist as far as I can tell, but there is an app called Deep Sky Camera, which is used for astrophotography. You might want to give that a try and see if that works. I have not tried that yet. I might try that tonight when I go out and collect again. But yeah, try those out if you have an iPhone and see if that works. Let's see. Let's see. Carol said, do you have an average f-stop? I usually shoot with 1.8 the whole time. I never change my f-stop. I change the ISO sometimes. Robert says, are long exposures capturing the flash pattern enough to ID species in some places if a specimen is not also captured for double confirmation? Yes, but it's always better to capture the specimen. But yes, you might be able to make an inference of what species you have. The problem might be that there's more than one species around. But yes, you might be able to identify a lot of the species to the species level if you know your flash patterns very well and you know the temperature and stuff like that. Sergio. Richard mentioned Zaragoza. So Zaragoza Caballero et al. 2020 was the first paper where the genus Elychnia was synonymized or sunk under Photinus. Zaragoza Caballero 2023, the on and off pattern paper, is the one where they show their analysis. So they did it in 2020, but in 2023, they actually published an analysis showing with morphological evidence why that was done. But the genus was anonymized in 2020. Then next video. Videos are great, so I'm going to show you. This is a video taken. And you can see on the left side, you can see the flash pattern, the fireflies flashing. This one can now be plugged into that app I talked to you about earlier. You can see if it's a synchronous one. And the videos are great because you can play them slowly and it allows you to do time measurements between the flashes in post-production. There might also be some apps out there where you can analyze these videos for how often the flashes are and how much light was produced. And you can play them forward and backwards, and you can re-look at the flash pattern in detail, compared with your notes and all of those things. And it allows you to capture a greater detail of the flash pattern. You can see if there's different species flashing because you can look at the different flash patterns again. You have to stabilize your camera or smartphone with a tripod, lean it against like a post or something. Like just make sure they're stabilized and you're not shaking when you take the videos, which is distracting. But videos can be very useful after the fact to do an identification, or even send it to someone like Lynn Faust, who is very good at distinguishing flash patterns and might be able to help you with who identified this. Here's the video again, just so you can see. In Lamperti, as far as we know, no species has the same flash pattern, so they're all different. So every species has a different one. That's why we can use them to identify them. I'm not sure if anybody has ever come across one that has the same flash pattern. This is a picture that by D'Arte that was also used in various publications by Jim Lloyd, where you can see 9 different firefly species and their flashing pattern. So you can see the first one does 3 dots and then a break and does 3 dots again. The number 2 is more regular with a dot every so often. And so there's very different flash patterns, and like this is how you can like identify them. And this is something you need to it takes some experience, it takes practice to be out in the field and look at them. And the more you do it, the better you get at it. But it sure takes a little bit of practice. Flash pattern terminology, this is something that is used in the literature. And when you talk to people, if it's some good things to know about. The flash duration is how long is a single flash. Then the flash interval, so how long is the break between flashes. And then we also use the period, which is the flash and the interval, the interflash interval. So those are all terms that you might, someone might ask you if they give them, your measurements. And then the whole thing is the flash train. So those things are kind of important things. This is something that you can record if you don't have a stopwatch or something like that. Richard told me you can be in the field and you can have a voice recorder and you can make sounds every time, you make a sound every time the flash is on, from the beginning of the flash till the end. Then you stop and make a sound again when the flash comes up. And then later on, you can measure the time interval if you don't want to use a stopwatch or some other things. So those are all kind of like terms you might want to get familiar with. And when you relay this information to someone that you seek help from, if you give them these terms and the times that come with them, they might be able to help you with identifying what you saw or captured. And then this is the flash pattern of Paralis, Photinus paralis, and you have a timeline of 7 seconds. The male will flash in the beginning in second 1 for 1 second. The flash is about 1 second. That J-shaped flash pattern is about 1 second long. And it will flash every 5.5 seconds. So at 5.5 seconds, it will flash again for 1 second. If there is a female around and the female was like, oh, that was a very nice flash, I'm going to answer, she will answer about 3 seconds after the end of the male flash, and she will flash for about half a second. So that's the difference between the flash pattern of this particular species. But when you observe this, you can see, is a male, just flashing along and hasn't gotten any answer, or when a female answers and you see the female sitting maybe on a grass or so, and you see that, and the male then starts flying closer and closer to the female, and they keep communicating. So you can see, you can observe the mating ritual, the mating flashing, and what's going on there. And also, you might see a Photinus male being called in by a Futurus female that has changed her flash pattern to lure a different species in. But this is kind of like what you're looking at in the field. So the males have a longer flash and very regular, and the females will answer this. If they're interested, the female will answer about 3 seconds after the end of the male flash. And that's the last slide. And I think we have time for questions till about 2:30, maybe.
Hey, Oliver, I think you mentioned this earlier, but can you just kind of talk about the importance of using these flash pattern details with like morphology and like why it's so important for species ID for some groups?
Again, like especially when it comes to like Photinus or Paractomina, you might be able to identify by the flash pattern, but in the beginning, you need a lot of experience doing that. So having the specimen to confirm is always better. And also, the more observations we have by you guys of flash patterns and maybe the picture of the specimen you observe, it will help us to get a better understanding and what we're looking at and how flash patterns change with temperature. We can like Lynn has all these flash patterns, but they're all at one temperature. So if you want to look at that over different temperatures, that will help. You can be fooled by a flash pattern, like Futurus. The female is flashing as a Paractomina or a Photinus at the second, and you mistake that. Because of that, you might misidentify you catch her and you misidentify her as a Photinus female, but it's a Photurus in that second. And there's a couple of Photinus Photurus that can be mistaken, I guess, that don't necessarily have the nice head shield patterns that most of them do. So it's like molecular. Your morphology should be like, I think, the most important part, but the flash pattern and the molecular are very informative and very helpful to do your identification and to make sure that you identified it correctly. So, and like if the more evidence you have, like a long exposure of video, the better it is, the better we can, help you with this if you want some help with identifications for what you have in your yard or what you have in your state park.
It seems like, especially for like species of Photurus, so many of them look like identical.
Yes.
So having this flash pattern information is really like the only thing we have to go off to be able to say like it might be this species.
Yes. So we have a whole drawer, probably around a couple hundred specimens of Photurus in the collection where I work, and because they're dead, almost none of them will be ever identified to species, because we do not, whoever collected them did not record the flash pattern. And as far as we know currently, the genitalia basically all look the same. There's very little difference in the genitalia, so it's really something we need to take a bigger look into and try to figure this out. But Jim looked at all the genitalia of all the species he looked at, and he said there's just not a reliable way to do this. And the pattern of the head shield varies so much in the same species, and then you have some other species that look exactly the same of some of these variable patterns. So it's, yeah. And like last night, I looked at the flash pattern first for a while before I caught my first specimen to make sure that I have the right species that I was looking for. So it's very important, especially for Photurus, very important. For now, hopefully a few years from now, we have a better way to do this, but for now, it's our only way to identify them. And you might have more than one species, which makes it just so much harder.
Well, and I think the point you just made too about like watching for a bit and then ensuring that you are capturing the same individual that you were just observing the flash pattern for. And that can be so hard in the field.
Yep.
Because there's darkness between these flashes. And so you really want to make sure that you are, the same individual that you are watching is the same individual that you capture, because it could otherwise be two different species. Yeah,
early on in my entomology career, I always thought butterfly people look ridiculous when they chase a butterfly in the field with their net. We don't look much better. It's just dark, so no one sees us. But yes, I usually watch for like 20 minutes till my eyes adjust to the darkness, so I can clearly see the fireflies. And then you look at one that's separated from the bunch of them, and you go and look at that for a little bit, and then you chase exactly that one. Don't go in an area where there's 5, 6 flying around, because you might get, you might lose track of the one you want to look. Kind of like isolate one with your eyes, make sure that it's the only one, and then you catch that exactly that. It takes practice, and but yes, Carly said tips on catching flying fireflies. You just need a very good net. I have a net that is extractable, so I can get like, I think I have like a 9-foot net or something when it's all out. For the higher flying species, that's not sometimes enough for Pyractomina. It's still too short. What you can do is watch their flight pattern. It's a little bit erratic, I think, but usually you can figure out somewhat where they're going, but also be aware they have big eyes. They can see that you're around, and they will adjust to movement of like something very big. And so they might change their flash pattern, but if you move slowly and watch them fly, you might just be able to catch them while they fly straight. But they will definitely know you're around, because you're a big shadowy thing in their surrounding. So you have to watch that, and don't turn the light on too much, because they stop blinking. So I try not to turn on my light, and you lose your night vision. Like that takes you 10 minutes to adjust your eyes again. So I usually try not to do that.
Just chiming in here, I would just echo what Oliver was saying, that really taking some time to watch the fireflies displaying before you try and catch a firefly can be really helpful. And understanding, kind of get that rhythm ingrained in your head, because really what you're doing is you're trying to anticipate where the firefly is going to flash next and swing there as soon as you see it. So you really have to anticipate. But it's not easy. I know some people who use, on the topic of being visible to fireflies, who wear like camouflage, and they use a net with a dark colored net rather than a white colored net. It's not like it's been tested, but could be worth a shot.
Just know you're not going to get every firefly you're going after. It's just not happening. You're going to lose some, and that's okay.
And then to answer Michael's question about the Petri dish, I just measured the Petri dish here that I have. It is about, this is not focusing on me. It is 90 millimeters by 15 millimeters. It's plastic. The other thing I do is I keep it inside a little cloth bag, or in this case, a sock, so that it stays scratch-free as long as possible. And they're pretty inexpensive to get a bunch of these. So when they do get scratched up, I just change them out.
The grid paper is underneath, it's not inside, right?
I actually do put it inside sometimes.
Oh, you put it inside.
Depending on the size of the firefly, sometimes they'll crawl under it, which can be good or bad depending on what kind of shot you're trying to get. But yeah, I will put it inside. You can play around in different ways though.
Amanda, that's the question by Amanda is probably one for you guys.
Yeah, I mean, for the Firefly Atlas, we're just accepting Firefly records, but this would be something great to put onto like iNaturalist, or Richard might have some other suggestions too.
Yeah, I would echo that. I mean, I think they're really cool. They're really cool beetles. Our data sheets are not really well suited for glowing click beetles, partly because of click beetles glowing rather than flashing, and just having different biology. But I mean, records in other places are still great.
Yeah, I mean, there's only a few species in Texas, 2 or 3, so they should be easy to identify based on a picture by some laterid specialist. You go into South America, they go crazy, and there's a bunch of them. Carly, you are talking about the limitations of IDing by morphology alone. I mean, you can identify every firefly based on morphology, I'd say, besides Futurus. For some reason, Jim Lloyd and Barber decided that flash pattern is the way to go, making the life harder for everyone else. Limitations by IDing by flash patterns, like I said, it's the mimicking. That could be the problem of Futurus mimicking. Otherwise, it's just your limitation is your practice. How often have you done it? How safe or how secure do you feel doing it? And it's basically, it's not something you can learn in a week. It will take practice, and it might take a season or two to actually, where you're going to feel like, yes, I get this, this is, and it also helps, like you see this flash pattern, you get the specimen, you get it identified to species, and you're like, okay, this flash pattern is this one. Next year, you're going to see the flash pattern, you're like, oh, I know what that is. This is great. And then you learn species after species when you see them by recognizing these flash patterns. And it's just not something you can learn very fast, I think. It's like Jim Lloyd took years and years to learn this, so that's all he did, so I don't know. But you can definitely learn it, and if you have the right information, Lynn's book, Jim's book, you have the background information you need to learn, right? Jim didn't have that. Jim had to go outside and learn all this. but he gave us this really great resource to do it. And that's just amazing. And we should use it. And taking videos, I think taking videos is maybe the key of you emphasize, like seeing them, taking the video, sitting down and watching this and see, then you're going to see little details that you didn't see in the field, because you're in the field, your senses are bigger, you're going to hear things, and you're going to be like looking right and left. Instead of focusing on your firefly, in a video you can focus. So that's actually a great thing. And that's like, just think about watching a movie. You watch a movie once, you watch it the second time, you're going to see things you never seen before. So that's the same thing. You take a video and you're going to be able to make much better sense of what you saw. And and they're going to be helpful for this, for everyone around you, everyone that studies Firefly. If you share them, if you put them on iNaturalist, we're going to see, Richard, I know Richard is on iNaturalist, I am on iNaturalist. We're going to see your posting in Fireflies, and we might be able to help you, or we might be able to learn something from what you posted, which is great. I think that might be a lot.
I'll just jump in and expand a little bit for Carly's question about the limitations of just using flash pattern information. You know, if temperatures were always the same across the board and we didn't have to deal with flash pattern intervals and flash pattern periods that changed with temperature, I think it would be more reliable. But you know, after even if you get really good flash pattern measurements for certain flash patterns that are pretty simple, like a single flash that's fairly regular, you then it's not just of like looking at the time difference, but it's looking at a graph of temperature and time and seeing where that falls. So I would say that, you know, it takes digging into it, and it's not a simple equation always, but yeah.
Females, actually, that's a thing that Mark Brenham looked at, and I think that's published, but he looked at that during his grad school, and he found that the faster the flash, the more interested the females are, and they actually used artificial flashes and made them way faster than any male could do them, and the females were way more interested in the artificial flashing than they were in the male actual male flashings, but just because they were more interested in faster flashing. So but that's why temperature goes up. And if you measure the same, like if I would go out yesterday, it was 71 degrees. If I would go out, if they were out in a month or two when we have 100 degrees, it would be, the flash pattern would be already so much faster than it already is. And it gets harder to then distinguish between certain things.